Welcome everyone to the Real Estate Experience Podcast. You know the next steps. Those of you who are on the YouTube, hit that subscribe button as well as that notification bell and hit that like. It's a very simple click of a button, doesn't take anything. Where on each and every one of these episodes, I give my personal experience share as an entrepreneur investor in the industry, and I bring on other high achieving investors as well. So today we've got special guest Reed Goossens, who's been on the podcast previously. Welcome, Reed.
Thank you so much, mate. Thanks for me back.
Yeah. So the time of shooting this, it's towards the beginning of December, and Reed and I were talking off camera that he was on here a year ago, and it's felt like 2020 has been 2-3 years, and it's just been a whole like mixture, or I don't even know what you would call it. Reed, what would you call it?
Roller coaster of emotions. I think it's, we were just saying how, back in February, Kobe Bryant died. And then we've had, the Australian bushfires, we've had COVID, we've had the election, we've had so much stuff, civil unrest in this country. So it's been quite a year, an exhausting year. So I'm sure a lot of people have had some pretty deep conversations with themselves, trying to find themselves. I know personally coming into 2020, both my wife and I were thinking this is going to be like the last year of hurrah before we try and like have kids or something. And it was like, that completely went out the window. So we're like, I think a lot of people have had a lot of self-reflection. And it's just been, some hard questions have been asked of each and one of us. And what does 2020 mean? And then what does 2021 look like, given that we've all been going through such a weird experience of 2020?
Yeah, agreed. And for those of you who want to get more on Reed's story, we go into more in depth on that. The episode is labeled from quitting a 9-to-5 to owning over $175 million worth of real estate. So you'll do a search on that and you'll be able to find that episode. It's on the YouTube. And so Reed is one of the partners or principals at the company Wildhorn Capital, in which one of his primary focuses is multifamily. And what is, I would say, Reed, just jumping right into the question is, should people be buying right now multifamily apartments?
The answer is always yes. It just depends on what you're buying and how you're buying. So for us at Wildhorn, we did our last syndication was in March of 2020, just before COVID hit. It was the lowest cash on cash return to our investors, but it was also in the prime market of Austin, Texas, in a very, very growing submarket right near downtown. We've also just closed on 2 other deals since in COVID, but those deals have been with private equity funds out of the East Coast. So what we're really seeing in sort of hot markets like Austin, Texas, where we're actively buying, is the adjustment of return expectations. So if you can still fathom or stomach a 12% IRR in a really growing city like Austin, Texas, and that 12 might be the equivalent of a 16 or a 17 in not as much of a growing market somewhere else in the country. So you really have to look at your risk-adjusted returns, why you're investing in certain markets for understanding if that particular market will go boom or go bust, and then backing into a return that makes sense. And so for us, in our thesis, it's been all about partnering with the right people who have a long-term vision on the market that we love so much and that we're seeing so much growth in. So to answer your question, yes, you still can buy. It's just you have to really, really understand what you're buying, where the value needs to be added, and what your long-term horizon is for that specific deal.
Yeah. And so piggybacking on that, what would be some tried and true methods? Because I know you've done some experience or some analysis, those who got wiped out in essence, that were overpaying in terms of putting too much debt on the property. What are some tried and true methods that people could use, especially during these times, to mitigate their risk as much as possible?
I think the biggest thing is, like you just said, don't go in with don't over leverage. Like just because money's cheap doesn't necessarily mean you need to go leverage to the hills. I would look between 65 to 75% on the purchase, and I would look to then raise all the capital expenditure dollars from investors. It will reduce your IRR, but you'll be lower leverage overall from a loan to cost point of view, and that will really help in the long term in terms of trying to achieve that cash flow. It also helps in the fact that you get to control your capital expenditure dollars if for whatever reason, we've seen on our portfolio, we've had to pause renovations because, we're offering concessions in some of our apartments. So when you're offering concessions, there's no point in spending good dollars if you're not going to get those rental pops. So the first one is making sure you've got low leverage, making sure you have an operating fund in case of a rainy day. COVID has completely taught us that, rent may not come due. Look, rewind back to April when people were worried about how they're going to even put food on their table, let alone pay their rent. So you need to have cash reserves on hand, and also then looking at never underwriting to refi. I think that's a really, really big important thing that I don't do. You might have it up your sleeve as sort of the ace up the sleeve, but if you're looking at a 5 or 7 year hold, you need to underwrite it to its merits today, and don't back yourself into a corner to say that, I'm going to refinance a property in 2 to 3 years where we didn't even know COVID. We were going to refi deals this year. We didn't even know COVID could happen. We were going to sell deals this year. COVID happened. It's sort of everything it can throw a spanner in the works. And so what that means is when you're looking at underwriting, make sure you don't box yourself into a corner to say, well, I need to refinance in year 3 and give a portion of the investors' money back to them, because investors will hold you to that. So overall, making sure you have low leverage, making sure you have an operating account on hand. So over raising to have a little bit of operating cash in those rainy days, like we saw back in April and May when COVID first hit, and then making sure you're not backing yourself into a corner in terms of a refinance. Definitely have it up your sleeve as part of the business plan, but maybe don't underwrite it and present that to investors, because overall it will reduce your IRR, and sometimes that's not necessarily a good thing if you're trying to promise something, given the instability in the markets that we've seen in the last 12 months.
Got it. Well, thanks for that, share. And for those of you definitely want to take notes on that. And as I mentioned, for those of you on YouTube, hit that subscribe button and also that like. So just going into, we talked off camera in terms of just really most people have taken a step back during these times of 2020, doing some reflection, some self-analysis. And we were speaking off camera. And one of the things that I was mentioning just from the beginning in terms of how I'm doing is, one, I talked about becoming the strongest version of myself, which is constant, but also I alluded to that just further figuring out who is Sterling White. So my question to you, Reed, what has been one of the realizations that you've experienced throughout this whole these times that we're in?
I think the biggest thing we've all got to remember is that we're all going through it, right? Like, it's sometimes hard when pre-COVID, when everyone's running their lives and doing things on their own times, on their own agenda. We tend to forget that people get up and go to work, and people, have kids, and people have stresses in their lives. And when COVID hit, we all were forced to go and lock down. And this wasn't just in America, this was across the world. This was back in Australia, this was back in the UK. And we all had to sort of deal with this new normal of being locked indoors and being surrounded by people that hopefully we love, but it could test that love, at times.
Exactly.
So,
yes.
But what I'm trying to get at is that you've got to sometimes be a little bit forgiving to yourself and understand that other people and COVID happened to everyone. It didn't just happen to 10% of the population. It literally happened across the world. People lost their jobs across the world. People lost revenue across the world. People were evicted across the world. Like, just remember,
people lost their lives due to
people lost their lives. People,
yeah,
exactly. People lost lives, lost loved ones, couldn't be there because of COVID in the hospitals and stuff like that, which is so tragic. Just remember, we are all going through some version of a hard time, and I think when you start to realize that you're not the only one going through a hard time, it sort of helps. It definitely helps me a little bit. Know that I can get up and know that I'm not the only one struggling at this point in time, because everyone's struggling, if that makes sense. And COVID was a real sort of set the level playing field a little bit in terms of how we all evaluate our lives, how we all evaluate what our goals are, how we all evaluate how we want to live our life. And hopefully for those people listening, COVID was a time of self-reflection that you could say, hey, where do I want to go? 2020 clearly wasn't what I'd planned out to be, but that's okay. And I'm going to pivot, and I'm going to make 2021 even better. And hopefully you've had those conversations with yourself, with your loved ones, with your business partners, to enable to use, again, 2020 as a launching pad for the next 10 years. Because, we'll look back at this time and not laugh, but look back and we say we all survived it. And for those people who obviously didn't, it's been a very tragic time. So we've got to come together. We've got to understand and be sympathetic to one another, but also be sympathetic to ourselves, knowing that, if we'd set some goals for 2020 and they didn't happen, that's okay.
Yeah, and I definitely appreciate those insights and that you mentioned about taking possible pivots, determining where you ultimately want to go, the self-reflection. So how have you been able to, and not even just during this time, to weather the storm from a mental standpoint? Do you not watch the news? Do you listen to audiobooks? How does that work from your side?
Probably about a year before COVID hit, I just had to turn the news off because of just all the political BS that was going on. Regardless of what side of the aisle you are, I'm not going to get political, but I just didn't need it in my life. And I listen to The Economist radio, and I get that. So I get my news from one news source, and it's like 15 minutes a day, and maybe I would even sometimes skip it. But I was really focused on not trying to be consumed by the 24-hour news channel. I don't have cable in my house. And so I'm really making sure I'm being intentional about the data that I bring into my life in terms of what I want to consume. But then also, taking some time in the morning and looking at meditation, making sure you have that mental calmness to approach the day, looking at journaling. I do listen to podcasts a lot. I try and, I try and listen to 3 or 4 different podcasts a week on certain podcasts that I know will help me from my mindset point of view, from my business point of view, but also just from an enjoyment point of view. I have one that I really, really love.
Is it your own podcast episodes? You just listen
No,
to those over?
No, I'm not. I don't have that much of an ego, but I listen to a rugby podcast.
That was a good one. That was a good one.
In the UK. So, but overall, I think if you're not working on your mental health in this time, you should start and start by just doing simple deep breaths every day, every morning before you wake up. Do not turn on your phone. Have some time in the morning before you get into the emails and the news and whatever you get addicted to.
Because you just get bombarded.
You just get bombarded. Take a little bit of time. And I'm talking like 15, 20 minutes. You can just start slowly. And you'll still soon realize that just taking that little bit of mental calmness in the morning before it dives into the day will help you with your anxiety, will help you with your sleep, will help you with your health. It'll help all the different things that, I know personally helped me. And I do certain different things each and every day that will make sure that I don't get consumed or don't get sucked back into what's on Instagram or what's on Facebook or what's on the news or what's in my email or, oh God, I've got to get that thing done tomorrow. Like having that mental calmness that you can just turn it off for a little bit and be present and be with your loved ones. And I think that's really, really important to keep learning that as we grow.
And that's one thing I've started to incorporate more is just not waking up checking emails because you have those. Yeah, it's not. I would not recommend it for people out there because you're like, I got to put this fire out. I've got to put this. So I just go to the gym, put my phone on airplane mode, either or do not disturb to cut it off. But also those of you. What really helped me and change the trajectory of my life was I did three key things. One was I had this aha moment where I was out in the middle of this boat read at a college party, having a good time, and I drifted away from people. And this question comes down to me and says, Sterling, is this what you want to do with your life? I answered no. And then after that, I did 3 things. One was cut off all my friends because they were not going where I wanted to go. Great people, but just it's something I knew I needed to go in a different direction. The next one was mindset, focusing on that. And the last but not least was cutting out the news. And that was in my early 20s. So I haven't consumed the news for the past 7-8 years, unless it's on the TV at the gym. Because it's just, you can really get consumed with that. And it's on your mind the whole entire day. So that's one thing I wanted to share with people. And so last question for you, Rita, is, what would you like your great grandkids to, how would you want to be remembered to them?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've only been asked this a couple of times, and it's like writing your own obituary, right? It's trying to be self-reflective. I think the biggest thing I want to be remembered for is a good, down-to-earth bloke who had an abundant mindset, not that I owned X amount of units or had an X amount of wealth, but just a good down to earth person that people remember fondly and that they can say, Reed was a really good guy who was a leader, inspired other people, and he left a legacy for the family the future family that we have.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks so much for being on the podcast, Reed. As
Pleasure.
mentioned, those of you on here, hit that subscribe button, notification bell, and simple like. How can people find you?
Easiest way to go to reedgoossens.com. That's reedgoossens.com. You can hit me up there, check out the books, check out the podcast. And if anyone is coming through LA once COVID starts to lift, you want to meet up for a beer or coffee or whatever that might be, look like in a post-COVID times, hit me up at info@reedgoossens.com. Just give me a bit of a heads up when you're coming through LA and we'll make it happen.
I will be one of the first people to take you up on that. I have been wanting to travel out to LA, and we'll see how things go with the new norm or how all of that works. That's a whole nother conversation itself.
It is.
But yeah, thanks so much for being on, Reed, and catch you soon.
See you, buddy.
All right. Thanks for listening to The Real Estate Experience. If this has brought you any value, please subscribe and leave a 5-star rating. It would mean the world to me. Now go out there and crush it.